Hey, um, I'm not here. I'm here in 129 now, but it is really early in the morning. I will not be here when you were here because I'm home with a sick kid who's got he was up coughing all night, and it's one of those coughs where you're pretty sure, but not entirely positive that his lungs might not come shooting directly out of it. Whoa, whoa, directly out of his head across the floor, and um, I like to think that um, I like to, consider myself kind of like a DIY doctor, like a do-it-yourself doctor. Been doing some research, um, Googling uh, things, but I think that uh, lung surgery is kind of harder than the things that I can do, like applying band-aids, washing owies. So I think that if I were to try to put his lungs back in, it wouldn't work. It would probably make things worse. I know my limits as a physician. So anyway, we're gonna keep him home today and hope that he starts doing better, and I will be back with you tomorrow. So anyway, just to let you know, kind of that my chin's getting real big all of a sudden. Chin's heavy. Anyway, just entertaining myself. So we're going to do a couple things. I'm going to talk through the reading for today. I'm going to have you do a little reflection, a little bit of writing. You'll get some reading time, and then we will leave this place. So if you could open up to page 21. So Montague had the conversation with Clarice, and she asked him, "Are you happy?" And this really started to mess with him. And then reminded he came back home, and his wife was unconscious and had overdosed on sleeping pills. And so these are the things he's kind of kicking around. So on page 21, the rain was thinning away, and the girl was walking in the center of the sidewalk with her head up and a few drops falling on her face. She smiled when she saw Montague. "Hello." He said hello and then said, "What are you up to now?" She said, "I'm still crazy. Rain feels good. I love to walk in it." And then she said, she licked her lips. "Rain even tastes good." What do you do? What do you do? Go around trying everything once?" he asked. "Sometimes twice," she said, looking at his hand. Now, what this is getting at, and I think I might have mentioned this in class yesterday, anytime you're reading a book or watching a TV show or watching a movie, things which take place in the water are important, right? If someone walks out into the rain, pay attention to, is something going on or something changing with this character? Or like the perfect example that, again, I can't remember whether I said this yesterday, but in The Wise Are Watching God, after Nanny said she needed to marry Logan, she ran and jumped in the pool, right? Baptized him into new life. After she was going to leave Logan and run away with Joe, she did the same thing. After Joe died, she did the same thing. After Tea Cake died, she did the same thing. 4 or 5 times. Every time there was a big change, she would go and like it's a symbolic baptismal scene. Um, had a, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be gone today, so I'm just recording a lecture for kids. Anyway, sorry, someone came in. So this is what's happening with Montague, right? So Clarice is acting as the catalyst and starting this change in him, and now he's kind of being baptized into this new life. So on 22, we have the conversation with the dandelions that we talked about yesterday. And on page 23, it says that she's been sent to a psychiatrist. I'm inclined to say you believe you need a psychiatrist, said Montague. You don't mean that. He took a breath and let it out again and said, no, I don't mean that. The psychiatrist wants to know why I go out and hike around in the forest and watch birds and collect butterflies. I'll show you my collection someday. Now, when you think about someone going to a psychiatrist, this would be someone who needs mental help, right? Who is struggling with things the way they are and maybe could use some assistance on that. But doing things like going out in the woods and hiking doesn't seem to fit that idea. So this tells us a lot about the society she lives in. It's just in comparison to the rest of the society, that's such a random thing to do, strange thing to do, that she needs mental help for that. And then she goes on, and then she starts to ask Montague about his job as a fireman. How did it start? How did you get into it? How did you pick your work, and how did it happen to think to take the job you have? You're not like the others. I've seen a few, I know. When you talk, you look at me. When I said I looked at something about the moon, you looked at the moon last night. Others would never do that. The others would have walked off and left me talking, or threatened me. No one has time to put up with me or anyone else. You're one of the few who put up with me. So she's just impressed that, and here's where the catalyst starts happening. If you look on page 24, we get a short comparison between both Montague, what's happening within Montague, and the mechanical hound itself. The mechanical hound is alive, but it's not alive, right? It's alive in that it can get up and do stuff and do what the firemen tell it to do, but it's not thinking, it's not doing its own thing. And so at the top of the page, Montague felt his body divided into a hotness and a coldness, a softness and a hardness, a trembling and not trembling, two halves grinding one upon the other. And so then the same thing with Mechanical Hound. The Mechanical Hound slept but did not sleep, lived but did not live, in its gently humming, gently vibrating, softly illuminated kennel back in the dark corner of the firehouse. So we got these two things. They both basically just do what they're told to do and do what they're programmed to do. And up until this point, that had been the way Montag was, right? He didn't really think about whether he was happy. He didn't really think about doing his job. This is what he's always done, and this is what he continued to do. If you go on to page 24, I guess we talked through that one. 26, 27, Montag comes in, and now kind of carrying on with that idea that the Mechanical Hound doesn't do except what it's programmed to do. When Montag goes up to it, the thing growls at him. And on page 27, Fire Captain Beatty said, "I was just figuring, what does it think about on those cold nights? It doesn't think anything we don't want it to. Last night it threatened me twice." And then the fire captain said, "It doesn't do what we don't tell it to do." So the fact that it growled on Montag, it's not making that decision on its own. This is something that's been programmed to do, which means this is some sort of message to Montag. If you go into page 29, we get a lot of information here about things that Clarice thinks about society. And I'm going to have you go through a couple of those things and try to tell me basically the point she's making about society and how much you agree with that. So on page 29, it talks a lot about school and gets into kids and how responsible or the lack of responsibility that they feel about things. And I want you to relate that to today. So this book was published in the 1950s, so over 60 years ago, and I want you to kind of think about how accurate was he in predicting what the future's going to be like. Going on, same thing on 31, so I'll give you these page numbers. Jump forward to page 34. So after you've gone through those, and then at the firehouse, Montag's talking to the other fire captains, and Montag says, was it always like this, the firehouse at work? I mean, well, once upon a time. Beatty says, once upon a time? What kind of talk is that? Fool, thought Montag to himself. You'll give it away. The fact that Montag is quoting the beginning of fairy tales tells us something about Montag. There's probably more going on with Montag than we know about at this point. And likely he's had some either experience with reading books or some knowledge of books as a whole, because to start that way, and Beatty jumped right on it, he knew that there was something weird with that conversation, indicates something about Montag. And then Montag says, didn't firemen prevent fires rather than stoke them up and get them going? Stonemen and Black drew forth their rule book, so they can read. Now, in the rule book it says, the Firemen of America established 1790 to burn English-influenced books in the colonies. First fireman was Benjamin Franklin. One of the things we're going to be talking about in your first test on this book is going to be about irony, use of irony. Okay, so we're going to be looking at some things, because there's lots of things in this book which are ironic, things which you would expect to be one way and actually are the other way. So for all those of you who have taken history classes, the fact that he said firemen were invented in 1790 by Benjamin Franklin to burn English-influenced books, we know that's not true. But because these people don't read, right, they have no interest in history, they have no interest in reading, they have no real intellectual curiosity, when they read something that says that's the way it was, that's the way they think it is. When you don't think, you become a not very smart person. Right after that, the fire alarm goes off, and they go to their first fire that we've seen in the book. One of the neighbors turned in their neighbor, Mrs. Blake. On page 36, usually what happens, the police went in first and adhesive taped the victim's mouth and bandaged him off in their glittering beetle cars, so that when you arrived, you found an empty house. You weren't hurting anyone, you were only hurting things. And since things couldn't really be hurt, since things felt nothing, and things don't scream or whimper, as this woman might begin to scream or cry out, there was nothing to tease your conscience later. You were simply cleaning up. Janitorial work, essentially. Everything in its proper place, quick with the kerosene, who's got the match. So usually the person's gone. But this time, the person wasn't gone by the time they got there, and that really messed with Montag, because all of a sudden, he has to see the person that he's interacting with and the person whose life he's wrecking. She holds out a match, right? And because basically she's willing to commit suicide and maybe kill off the firemen. So they sprayed kerosene all upstairs in the attic, and so the house is full of fuel, and if she just lights the match, they all go, but she's willing to die with her books. Okay, now on page 40, last thing I'm going to say, as they were on the way to the on the way home from the fire, rather, the woman, before she was burnt, said, and Montag is trying to quote this, she said, Master Ridley, she said some crazy thing when we came to the door. Play the man, she said, Mr. Ridley, something, something, something. Beatty immediately jumps in with a direct quote. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out, said Beatty. Stoneman glanced over at the captain, as did Montag, startled. A man named Latimer said that to a man named Nicholas Ridley as they were being burnt alive at Oxford for heresy on October 16, 1555. Now, what that means is, obviously, these people who were being burnt alive for heresy means they were being burnt alive for speaking out against the church. So two dudes are standing with their backs up against the stake, and they're getting ready to be burnt alive. One of them said, we're going to light such a candle in England as I trust shall never be put out. Literally, they will go out, right? Whether it's their bodies or the fuel they gave to the fire, it's going to go out. But what he means is the people watching this are going to see this and they're going to remember this, right? That candle that's never going to be put out is in the minds of the people watching. And so she's comparing herself to the people who spoke out against the church. And so in Montag's mind, the fire is never going to go out. Montag saw that this woman was going to die for her books, and that indicates to him that there's something, probably something quite important in books that would cause her to be willing to die for them. Okay, so you're going to do a couple things. First, Sub's going to pass out. I've got a list of a couple quotes of Clarice's views on society in a small group of no more than 3 people, and you will turn in 1 page. I want you to just explain briefly what she's talking about in each of those parts and how much you agree with what she's saying. And then once you're done with that, you can start reading for tomorrow, and you will read up to page 40 to page 60 for tomorrow, and I should be back then.